Next on the news. The sweltering heat gripping New York and many other parts of the nation, and we may not see relief for days. Also,
my number one job is to protect the health of New Yorkers, especially our vulnerable children.
Governor Kathy Hochul unveiling a COVID strategy for when school opens in the fall, what she had to say about students and masks. Plus,
the idea that you have to somehow be an atheist to be doing science, that's a lie.
We get some insight from the director of the Vatican Observatory about NASA's breathtaking new images of God's creation. And how a young checkers champion in Ukraine is using her skill at the game to help her nation's army out. I'm Christine Persichetti. Current News starts right now. The summer sizzle is on as New Yorkers try to make their way through Times Square. At the same time, the relentless heat fueling wildfires in Texas that have burned thousands of acres. Around the country this week, more than 100 million people are under heat advisories or warnings, with around 60 million Americans likely to see temperatures over 100 degrees. And the extreme heat is staying with us for at least a few more days. This is the place to be this week. New Yorkers flocked to the Rockaways Wednesday to try to beat the heat as temperatures soared into the 90s with feel-like temps climbing into the triple digits.
This is serious heat, and we're really concerned about those, particularly with pre-existing respiratory conditions.
In Florida, high temperatures prompted the hiring of a chief heat officer to protect residents from the sweltering conditions.
We have almost double the number of days with a heat index over 90 degrees here in Miami than we did in the 1970s.
It's even worse in Texas, where Austin's mayor says it's the 40th day in a row with temperatures over 100 degrees.
Summers can be hot in Texas, but this is unlike anything that I've seen. We had temperatures up to 109 degrees.
Imagine not having air conditioning. That was the case in Arizona, where thousands were without power on Tuesday in the triple-digit heat.
Very hot inside the house.
In California, splash parks like this one in Sacramento are providing some relief. Connecticut residents are diving into pools in the city of Hartford to cool off. But if you can't be near the water, doctors say you should avoid the heat and drink plenty of fluids.
Wear loose-fitting clothing, light clothing, things that are breathable, such as cotton and linen, and then also keep well hydrated and wear wide brim hats and try to stay in the shade as much as possible.
Forecasters say New York City is facing the longest stretch of 90-degree temperatures in nearly a decade. The sweltering heat is expected to linger through Monday. So here are some more tips on how you can stay cool. As the doctor mentioned, the most obvious and important is to drink plenty of liquids. Dehydration is a leading cause of heat-related illnesses. Speaking of which, make sure you eat regular meals and snacks to replace the salts and electrolytes lost through sweating. And finally, try your best to stay indoors or in a shaded area from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m., which is usually the hottest part of the day. But if you still need help, then Catholic Charities Brooklyn and Queens is there for you. A number of their senior centers also serve as cooling centers. Just head online to ccbq.org/senior-centers to find one near you, or call them at 718-722-6001. The MTA Inspector General's office says the agency is not ready to use resources to prevent flooding in the event of a hurricane. This flooding triggered subway delays and cancellations on Monday. A new audit found the MTA underestimated how long it takes to deploy flood control devices installed since Hurricane Sandy. The devices include thousands of vent covers and 75 flex gates at subway entrances to prevent stormwater from entering the system. New York Governor Kathy Hochul is preparing a COVID plan for back to school, announcing today in a press briefing her strategy for kids come fall includes being maskless in the classroom.
We don't currently, based on today's numbers, anticipate the need for masks in classrooms, but I'm going to reserve the right to return to this policy if the numbers change, the circumstances change, and the severity of the illnesses change.
Governor Hochul says she also plans to send 3 million test kits to districts for distribution before classes resume. Every 2 seconds, someone in the U.S. needs blood or platelets, but every summer there's a drop in blood donations. As Mandy Gaither reports, the American Red Cross is asking you to give.
It's that time of year again. As summer heats up, the level of blood donations in the U.S. goes down.
In June alone, we saw a 12% decline in donations, which is very significant and more than we have seen in many, many months.
Summer months are always a struggle for blood collection as travelers head out for vacations, blood drives can't be hosted at schools, and people tend to make less time to donate. The pandemic also hasn't helped, says Rodney Wilson with the American Red Cross.
Lots of factors related to COVID continue to make it hard for us to collect enough blood.
The American Red Cross says whole blood is the most flexible type of donation. It can be transfused in its original form or separated into red cells, plasma, and platelets to help multiple people. It's often given to trauma patients or those having surgery.
The need for blood can come up unexpectedly and very suddenly at any time.
Wilson says more donors of all blood types are needed to prevent typical summer shortages.
On average, the Red Cross needs to collect close to 13,000 blood donations every single day to support patients at 2,500 hospitals across the country.
He says it only takes about an hour of your time to help others. I'm Mandy Gaither.
If you want to find a blood donation center near you or schedule an appointment to donate, just log on to redcrossblood.org or you can call 1-800-RED-CROSS. It's no secret that rents in New York are rising at an alarming rate, but the tablet newspaper says it's about to get worse. The paper says tenants and landlords are concerned now that the Rent Guidelines Board, which regulates rent-stabilized housing in all 5 boroughs, has allowed the first major hike in 8 years. Renters argue now is not a good time, and landlords say this decision didn't raise them enough. But to fully hear both sides of the story, you'll have to pick up the paper. You can read all these stories by picking up the paper at your local church, but if you want to get future editions delivered directly to you, just go to thetablet.org and subscribe. More than a dozen Democratic lawmakers arrested in a pro-abortion protest outside the Supreme Court.
Our choice, our money, our choice, our money.
New York Congresswoman Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and other lawmakers were picked up by police. The Democratic members of Congress marched from the Capitol to the court, which was fenced off shortly after the leak of the draft decision overturning Roe. Meanwhile, a House committee held a hearing about the impact of the reversal of Roe. There were 5 pro-abortion witnesses testifying on behalf of legalizing abortion on demand. And there was just a single pro-life witness, Dr. Christina Francis, a practicing OBGYN who's a pro-life advocate.
With the advancements in medical technology and understanding over the last 49 years, it is now undisputed fact that at the moment of fertilization, a distinct, living, and whole human being comes into existence.
Dr. Francis went on to testify about several issues, including the medical risks to women of abortion pills obtained without an in-person doctor's appointment. In the Diocese of Brooklyn, there are a number of resources available to help expectant mothers and new moms. There are currently 2 pregnancy centers, the Life Center of New York on 5th Avenue in Brooklyn and the Bridge to Life in College Point, Queens. In terms of housing options for young mothers with children, there are actually 5 options. 3 Providence houses, 1 on Church Avenue in Brooklyn, 1 on Prospect Avenue in Brooklyn, and 1 in Jamaica, Queens. There's also 2 more Brooklyn centers, the Rose Kennedy Family Center on Halsey Street and Bethany House on Sidham Street. The First Lady of Ukraine on Wednesday addressed Congress in an emotional plea. She asked for more U.S. aid as Russia continues its deadly assault on her country. Jen Sullivan looks at the steps the U.S. is already taking to help Ukraine.
The sound of gunfire has become a daily occurrence in parts of Ukraine since Russia invaded back in February. A woman sobbing in the streets as more lives are lost each day. Parts of the southern port city of Odessa on fire and left in ruins. As the Ukrainian people continue to fight to keep their independence, the country's government is asking for more help. This week, First Lady of Ukraine, Olena Zelenska, is in Washington, meeting with the Bidens and other U.S. officials to encourage continued support for her ravaged country. The two First Ladies sitting down at the White House Tuesday.
You cannot go into a war zone and come back and not feel the sorrow and the pain of the people.
According to the Department of Defense, the U.S. is sending more weapons and equipment to Ukraine, including multiple launch rocket systems and artillery ammunition.
We will continue to provide Ukraine with historic levels of security assistance.
This as Russia lays the groundwork to annex the territory it controls in Ukraine.
Annexation by force would be a gross violation of the UN Charter, and we will not allow it to go unchallenged or unpunished.
I'm Jen Sullivan reporting.
It was a final farewell to Ivana Trump. The funeral for the first wife of former President Donald Trump was held at a historic Catholic church in Manhattan Wednesday. The former First family gathered at St. Vincent Ferrer Roman Catholic Church for a celebration of life service. Ivana, a world-class Czechoslovakian skier and businesswoman, was found dead after an accidental fall in her New York City apartment last week at the age of 73. There's a lot more news headed your way. They are awe-inspiring images of the universe. Next, we get some insight from Brother Guy Consolmagno from the Vatican Observatory about the new pictures from NASA. And one of God's creatures in serious trouble, how crews managed to get a horse out of a dangerous situation. They are new and breathtaking images of God's creation that scientists are now studying very closely. Last week, the world was amazed as NASA's James Webb Space Telescope revealed the sharpest and deepest infrared picture of the distant universe so far. Brother Guy Consolmagno, the director of the Vatican Observatory, knows many of the scientists who built that telescope. He joins us now from Rome. And Brother Guy, thanks for being here.
It's a delight to be here and share this stuff.
Absolutely. So this telescope has been called our golden eye in the sky. What does it reveal about the expansiveness of the galaxies, and how much more is there to discover?
Well, it's got a bigger mirror than Hubble did, and it's looking in wavelengths that Hubble wasn't able to see before. In particular, with the infrared, you can see through dust, you can see farther back in time, and so it's already discovered galaxies older, closer to the Big Bang than even Hubble was able to see. And it's that data that really give us not just the pretty pictures, but the way to interpret the pictures and understand what's going on in them.
Just amazing. So everybody's wondering, can these images actually prove God's existence?
Of course not. God is not something you prove. God is something that you accept on faith, and with your faith in God, then you have the courage to ask questions about God's universe.
All right, but you've said the universe is logical and beautiful. What do these images show us about God's creation and everything He set into motion?
Well, you know, our basic story of creation, Genesis 1, started with a cosmology that was 2,500 years old, a flat Earth. But what Genesis adds is the thought that God deliberately made the universe as orderly as day follows night in a way that any one of us can understand. And the pinnacle of creation in Genesis was the seventh day, was the Sabbath, was the day when we get to stop worrying about what are we going to eat for lunch and instead think about this creation and the God who made it. And that's just an extension of what we're doing with the Webb telescope.
Right. Now, the Vatican's observatory began in 1582. How do advancements in science like these prove that science and faith in God can coexist?
Well, science began at the universities, the medieval universities, where people like Thomas Aquinas and St. Albert the Great were able to first ask questions about God's universe, because it is the church and its faith in a creator God that gives our culture the excuse to do science. What's more, you'll find that all through the history of science, the great scientists have generally been people of deep faith. The Big Bang that we're illustrating with the Webb telescope was devised by a diocesan priest, Georges Lemaitre from Belgium. And the idea that you have to somehow be an atheist to be doing science, that's a lie. The history is just that it's not true, including the dozen of us, all Jesuit priests and brothers, here at the Vatican Observatory.
That's a good point. All right, what else do you think we'll be able to discover about our universe if technology continues to advance at the rate it is now?
You know, I was thinking about this. It was 50 years ago when I was a student at MIT, first beginning to study planetary sciences. And if I had known then how much we'd learn in 50 years, I would have been amazed.
Yeah.
I only wish I could be around for the next 50 years. I think even with the Webb, we'll be able to measure the chemistry of atmospheres around planets, around other stars, and maybe even find evidence that there's life on them, though I don't think we'll be able to talk to that life, but we'll know it's there. If it's there, that'll be exciting. We'll be able to test our ideas about how the universe was made, because we can see back to practically the very beginning of the universe. And every time we've done that, we've not only learned that what we had thought was right, but that there's more going on than we even ever could have thought. So that's why we're doing it, because we don't know what we're going to find out.
Absolutely fascinating. Director of the Vatican Observatory, Brother Guy Consolmagno, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, it's a delight to be here.
Despite delivering out-of-this-world images, it has now been discovered that the Webb telescope suffered damage that cannot be corrected. A new report outlines the telescope's performance during its commissioning phase, and according to scientists, it was damaged by a micrometeoroid strike last May. The scientists currently don't know the long-term effects of the strike, but say the telescope is still performing a level that exceeds all mission requirements. The Army is searching for soldiers after reporting low recruitment. Officials saying they are probably going to fall short of the Army's recruitment goal by nearly 40,000 new troops over the next 2 years. The reason, low unemployment and fewer people interested in serving. The Army hopes to combat the problem by making better financial incentives, as well as possibly allowing recruits in with no high school diploma. It was a horse in deep trouble, injured and stuck down a canyon in California together with its rider. The safest way out was to be flown out by helicopter with the help from dozens of others. Tony Lopez has more on the daring rescue.
Veteran firefighters say it's one of the more unusual calls of their career.
It's a first for me.
A horse and its rider stuck hundreds of feet down a sheer cliff in the American River Canyon near Forest Hill.
Going through my mind is how are we going to get this horse out?
The safest way out was up. A helicopter from the Butte County Sheriff's Office was dispatched along with emergency veterinarians from UC Davis, equipped with a special equine sling capable of carrying an injured horse.
It takes a lot of coordination with the helicopter, with their resources, with the veterinarians to prepare the horse.
The accident happened during the annual Tevis Cup race, a Trans-Sierra trek that starts in Olympic Valley and ends in Auburn over a 24-hour period.
These are athletic horses. They're doing 100 miles in a day, up and down very, very steep hills.
The gray Arabian gelding lost his footing coming down some switchbacks and slid down a steep cliff.
They were about 150 feet off of the trail on a 70-degree slope with very loose soil.
Rescue crews first focused on the horse's owner.
The horse rider had sustained some injuries.
They then sedated the horse, attached a 150-foot rope dangling from the helicopter, and prepped for liftoff.
And finally, it lifts the horse up above the treetops, and you're able to see that. And it's very impressive.
It's a pretty miraculous thing to see.
Vets took a good look at the gelding once he was back on solid ground and say he's expected to recover.
The horse only had minor injuries, and from what I hear, the horse is doing well.
A high-flying horse rescue, one for the history books in this foothill community.
It's something that I've never seen up close before. Don't know that I ever will again.
Amazing video. That was Tony Lopez reporting. Thankfully, the horse had a GPS tracker and was located quickly after the fall. The Tevis Cup race is the oldest endurance ride of its kind and dates back to 1955. The sights and sounds of Greece on the stage at St. Joseph the Worker Catholic Academy.
We'll get some overhead lifters and some four-barrel quads, oh yeah. Keep talking, oh, keep talking.
They're great. It was all a part of the school's enrichment program, which encourages teachers to dive into their interests together with their students. And for this project, back in June, 15 kids took to the stage, learning how to sing, dance, and even play instruments. Unfortunately, the rising stars couldn't perform the musical live, but the show did premiere online on the school's Facebook page. Congrats to them. Still to come on Currents News, she's a checkers champ on a winning streak, and it's a victory for her and her country of Ukraine. Now to a story of two brothers. One paid the ultimate price in World War II. The other dedicated his life to telling his brother's story. But now, after 8 decades, they finally get to have their long-awaited goodbye at the siblings' gravesite, thousands of miles away. Alex Ladstatter reports.
Harold and Dan Gary were both born in the early 1920s in the Rush Township, just outside Montrose, Pennsylvania. Growing up on a dairy farm, neither had traveled much. That was until the Second World War.
When he signed up, he had the promise that he would be called up when the educational requirements for pilot training were lowered from 2 years college to a high school education. And as soon as that was lowered, he was called.
While Dan went into the Air Force, Harold enlisted in the Navy, both volunteering to serve their country.
And he got in. From the time he was called, in 9 months, he had his crew of 10 and had mastered the B-17 Flying Fortress.
Dan's experience with the Air Force led him to England, where he would serve as group lead pilot on his 25th mission, which would also be his last.
His group was among, I don't know how many groups that particular day, flying, raiding over Meersburg, Germany. Well, they dropped their bombs and it was successful that way, but a minute after that, he received a direct hit.
Dan passed away on November 30th, 1944. Harold did not officially hear word of this until 1945. At the request of their mother, Dan was interred in Ardennes American Cemetery in Naples, Belgium, something Harold would visit 78 years after his brother's death.
It was. Emotion was catching up to me.
The trip never brought him closure, but gave him a new perspective.
It helped me maybe visualize better what he had gone through, what he had experienced, all of it together.
That was Alex Ladstatter reporting. Harold was able to visit his brother's gravesite on D-Day, June 6th. His trip also included a private tour at a museum and airfield in England dedicated to his brother's flight group, the 57th Bomber Squadron. And finally tonight, a 10-year-old checkers champion in Ukraine has been hard at work winning hearts and money for her country's army. At a small folding table outside a shopping center in Kyiv, Valeria Yachova quickly claims victory over every opponent who sits down at her checkers board. Those who lose pay up. And Valeria donates the funds to a Ukrainian foundation that provides equipment and humanitarian aid to the military. After 9 days, the 10-year-old world champ has raised more than $700, all without losing a single match.
I really wanted to help our army and soldiers, and I asked my mother what I should do, she said. My mom asked me what I'm good at. I said, playing checkers. I would like to live a normal life, but during the war, it's difficult, she says. Of course, I'm scared. There are a lot of negative feelings.
Now other kids in her checkers club are following her lead, taking to the streets to support their country. Good for them. And that is Currents News. I'm Christine Persichetti. Thank you for joining us because we are putting your faith in the news. Hope to see you again next time.